Whoa, what is up, everyone? Welcome.
Yo,
Yo, Dan, how's it going, my man?
it's good. How are you doing, Josh?
I am exceedingly well, thank you. Happy Thursday. We're about into a new year.
Almost
Getting
there.
almost there. 2021, which was really 2020 part deux, is
Right?
almost behind us, and we're about to begin a new year. And I can't think of a better time to be talking about what we got to talk about here today about design uh, thinking. So for those of you out there, welcome to Startup Shop Talk. This is a weekly interactive live stream show right here on YouTube, entirely about startups and innovation, from idea all the way to product market fit. And the first question I have for everybody out there is, are you a startup founder? If not, what are you working on? Let us know down in the comments. Where are you watching from? Are you local here to Sacramento, which is where Dan and I are right now, or what's going on? We want to hear from you. What are you working on? Where are you calling from? So Startup Shop Talk is hosted by my buddy Dan Cassis Murray of the Lean Innovator, and
Yo.
yours truly, JDM of the Right Box. And our goal is to create an open-ended forum where entrepreneurs can ask questions about innovation, about entrepreneurship, about the startup lifecycle, about techniques, about tools, and more to startup advisors such as us, to investors, entrepreneurs, and all of our peers. And the idea here is, how do you eat an elephant? You eat an elephant one bite at a time. So no matter what your startup elephant is, hop onto this show each and every week and let's take a bite of that together. Now, before we get into today's content too much, I want to do a little intros here. Say we're going on. First, I'm going to say hello to my buddy Dick in the audience from
What up, Dick?
Sacramento here. He's a ecosystem player and mentor to startups. Good morning, Dick. How's it going today? All
An
right. So
all-around
Dan,
great guy.
an all-around great guy.
Yeah, I've
So
had many conversations with Dick, and it's been always enlightening, always great, and he brings a wealth of experience to our conversation every time I talk to him.
he certainly does, and
Yeah,
Sacramento's lucky to have him as a mentor.
totally
So
agree.
Dan, tell me a little bit about you. Who are
Uh,
you?
Well, if you haven't noticed already, I'm a professional interrupter and I'm a professional student teacher. So, anyways, what that means is I'm curious about a lot of things. A lot of times I'm curious about too many things for my brain to hold. And, anyways, when I find out about something, I just have to talk about it. I have to share it with folks. And so, what ends up happening is sometimes people listen and they're like, tell me more. And I'm like, oh, you just don't know what kind of mistake you just made. And so, bam, that's how classes are kind of created, at least in Danland. So that's what I do. I learn stuff. I learn stuff what other people want to know about, and then I tell them about it. So it's really great. One of the key things that I love talking about is basically how to find customers by examining that which is hidden in plain sight. In other words, finding golden nuggets, finding insights by talking with customers and understanding like their points of view about stuff, which is actually a little bit about what we're going to be talking about today. But finally, I'm the founder at the Lean Innovator, which is an organization that shows folks how to co-create value propositions along with customers. And so this idea is I'm not sitting there in a lab coming up with like big brain ideas about how I'm going to change the world so much as I'm working with my customers to understand how do we make this solution together in a way that really hits their buttons and hits my buttons as a creator at the same time, so that we're just creating holistic solutions to problems, basically. So that's who I am. How about you, Josh?
Very, very, very cool. So welcome, Dan. I'm super fortunate to have you as my co-host here today and every week on Startup Shop Talk. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Josh David Miller, aka JDM, and I am a professional instigator, a professional woody woodpecker. That's what I do for a living. More specifically, I am an expert in the metacognition of innovation and entrepreneurship. That's how to think about innovation and entrepreneurship. More specifically, still, I would say my superpower is finding the right next question to ask to create focus, to create clarity, and ultimately to create potency. As a volunteer, I'm a startup ecosystem builder here in Sacramento. So Dan and I, and also Dick, whom we introduced earlier, we're all involved in various programs here in Sacramento, including 1 Million Cups and startup weekends and all kinds of stuff. Professionally, by day, I am the founder of The Right Box, which is a bespoke team of instigators that helps startups and corporate teams make innovative decisions using design thinking, which is actually a really great transition because today's topic is all about design thinking. It's one of my favorite favorite things. It's this giant, like, unwieldy topic that Dan and I, in our own unique way, are gonna try to boil down into its essentials. And we're probably gonna, like, come at this from two different perspectives. I tend to be more academic and more, this is like, because again, metacognition, right? Like, this is what design thinking means. Like, oh, it's what you want to think about it. And Dan's gonna be like, yeah, but bro, here's how a startup does it. So that's our framing here. So I want to think, Dan, when you hear design thinking, when you talk about design thinking, what is it that comes to mind for you? And I ask the same question to our audience here today. Are you guys familiar with design thinking? Like, what's your impression of it? Like, how do you find it interesting? Let us know down in the comments. And Dan, like, take it away. What's design thinking to you?
So initially, when I heard about design thinking, I was like, okay, well, intuitively, it kind of sounds kind of cool. That means I'm like, wait, I'm thinking about like how to create things. I'm thinking about like design thinking means like approaching a problem from a specific point of view. Um, and so that kind of led me to put together this definition. It's a process for creators that allows them to work with their customers to co-create solutions to their wicked problems. So that's kind of how I think about this whole thing. And that's, initially I was just curious about, well, wait a minute, what is this? It sounds kind of cool, but I wasn't really sure what it was. And after having practiced it and put it into practice, which was really hard, by the way, at least for guys like me, is, and man, it's just this fascinating. It's like, the input is your curiosity, and it's a process, and it's guardrails to thinking, and the output is just amazing stuff that I never would come up with just by myself. So what do you like to think about it like, Josh?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I am gonna answer like kind of in a vague, broad, like mysterious way. And it's because I think of design thinking as this mechanism by which we can answer questions that seem like they're completely unanswerable. And we do that by taking a question or taking a problem and restructuring it or reworking it, reinterpreting it in a way that once we do, it suggests a path to the solution, right? And so, like, if we want to be, I know, mysterious, but we're going to unpack that because there's a lot to unpack there. Just by way of history, for those who are a little bit more academic, the design thinking concepts come all the way back from the 1960s into psychological research on creativity. It's the ideas of creative engineering and productive thinking and all these other ways that we can use to actually systematize how we think about design, because it's not this abstract, like, infinite void where we just create whatever we want and we just pull shit out of the ether, right? It's not like that. It's actually much more it's actually that we can systematize this and put something to it. And I would say that, like, to frame, like, how do we use design thinking? What does design thinking do well? Right? It comes to the kinds of questions that you ask. So there are three kinds of questions in the world. The first one is what we would call a well-defined or a simple question or problem, right? And so a well-defined problem is one where there is one path or maybe multiple paths, but to one right answer. The question has one answer. All other answers are wrong, right? And we might take different paths to get to that right answer, but there's still one right answer. It's a really well-defined, really simple problem, right? So there's that. The second kind that we've got going on there, number two, for Dan there over there who's keeping track of the math, is the so-called ill-defined problems, or the poorly defined problems. And these are the problems where not only are there multiple paths to the solution, right? But there's actually more than one right solution. There's more than one right answer to the problem, right? Not everything has one right answer, right? It's not a math problem, some algebraic equation that we figure out, right? And so we can take all these different paths to all these, different types of solutions. So it's poorly defined, it's ill-defined, or whatever. The third kind, number three, thanks, Dan, are the questions that are really complex. We call them wicked problems. These are the problems that don't just have multiple paths to multiple different answers, but they're questions that themselves actually aren't even clear enough to have an answer yet, right? And
That
so this
sounds
is a
pretty wicked.
question like, how do we solve homelessness? That's a wicked question, right? Because we don't know what we mean by that. If we were to be reductive with it, we would say, well, homelessness means people don't have homes. How do we solve homelessness? We buy everyone a house. Done. Next problem, politicians, bring it on, right? But that's not what we
Doesn't really
mean.
work that way.
It doesn't work that way. And it's like,
Yeah.
that's because the problem that we're solving isn't the thing that we mean by homelessness, right? There's something else there. To bring that into more common questions that we're going to encounter would be like, how do we create the best onboarding experience for our customers, right? Not only is there no right answer to that question, there's probably wrong answers, but there's no right answer to that question. It's also the question isn't specific enough. What do we mean by onboarding, and how are we defining success in that? What does that look like, right? It's a wicked problem.
That question actually makes more questions, right? Because it's not clear
It
enough.
does. It does. And that's the point, because in a wicked problem, what we're looking for in terms of an answer, right, is actually a question, right, that we can use to further clarify the wicked problem, right? That's what do we mean by onboarding? What does success look like? Or if we go back to homelessness, why does homelessness exist? What are the causes of homelessness? And how are those approached from psychological, from political, from socioeconomic, et cetera, perspectives, right?
So I have a question.
Yeah.
So are we delving into that don't know what we don't know and don't know and know what we don't know kind of box here when we're thinking about wicked problems?
I think we are, right, and it's about asking the right questions. And when we're talking about something that's open, like design and creativity, we're talking about things that can't inherently answer themselves. And because they can't inherently answer themselves, we have to use tools to approach the question, right? To do that restructuring in a way that sort of just pulls us by virtue of process toward the answer that we're looking for.
Oh, cool. So, okay, so what you're telling me is we've got this like system that we can use that will help us sort of like even if we don't know what we don't know, this will help guide us anyways. It's sort of like answering our questions by holding a lantern in front of us, and that actual using the process is the actual lantern to find to light up the way. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, that's right. And by just by virtue of using those tools, right? We're
Yeah.
just by virtue of putting up the lantern, we are like fireflies drawn to it, right?
Okay.
It's about
So
manipulating our psychology to good effect.
okay. So my question is, why can't I just know stuff ahead of time? And why do I need to use a damn lantern anyways? Like, why? Why do I have to like use these processes to trick out reality? Aren't I smart enough to like come up with all of this?
I hope
What's the
you are,
problem?
but
I don't think I
intelligence.
am. I don't think right. I think intelligence is like actually like
Right.
it's an irrelevant part of the conversation here, right?
It can be, right? I mean, so intelligence helps. I'm a guy who lives in his
Sure.
brain, so I'm not going to say that that's not
I mean,
important. It's
hey,
very
me
important to
too,
me.
right?
But yeah, no, to your point, that's totally right, because the idea here is that there are unknowns, right? We're
Mhm.
living in a world of unknowns. We're living in a world where the problem itself is unknown. We actually don't know what question we're asking,
Yeah.
right? And so this is where all of our cognitive biases come into play. But we can get back to that later, right? We've kind of kept it abstract with design thinking. I want to get into a little bit more of a specific definition of what we mean by design thinking. So here is, like, forgive the terrible little illustration that Dan and I threw together from a photo that we took of a book 10
By
minutes ago,
we, he
but
means he.
that I took from a book.
I mean,
To
I'm not
fair
trying
credit,
to
the book
take credit.
the book is called The Design Thinking Playbook. That's by Ulrich Lincoln Leifer. So if you're curious, you can go ahead and look that up. But this is a very common way of looking at what design thinking is, right? We think of it as this 5 or 6-step process, depending on exactly how you define it, right? And so we're going to go through these steps just super quick, and then we're going to get real practical, because this is a show about startups, right? So let's talk about this far left side here, where we have the users and about understanding and observing. And another way of talking about understanding and observing is empathize. And I know Dan's going to have a lot more to say about that in a little bit. So we first have to understand who we're trying to serve. We have to observe them. We have to get in their heads, understand what problem they're experiencing, and empathize with them so we can understand what's going on with them. Once we have all of that data, we can then define a point of view. And what we mean by that is we want to figure out for whom, right, we're trying to solve a problem, right? That's who the customer is. Then we want to figure out what do they want to achieve, right? And then we want to figure out why those results are important. And then once we understand for whom and what they want to achieve and why the results are important, we can figure out, okay, how can these results be achieved in a product? And once we get through that intellectual work, the whom, what, why, and how, we can translate that into a design question. Like, how can I do blah, blah, blah that helps the customer with whatever. And that design question is what we're then going to use this process to focus in on. This is that next question that serves to clarify the wicked question, right?
So, okay, so wait a minute. So we're asking questions in order to get to a question.
We are asking questions in order to get to a question. And
All right.
then once we get to a question, that's our point of view, right, for the process. Then we're going to ideate around solutions for that question. We're going to pick the right solution to focus on first, right? The one that we think is most likely to be interesting or compelling, or to most likely address that point of view, that design question. And then we're going to prototype it rapidly, as quickly as possible. And then we're going to put that in front of live customers to do a test and see, are we right? And you may notice from the many, many arrows on this diagram that we're often going to be wrong. And that's going to take us back here. Did we not understand the customer? Did we pick the wrong point of view, right? Did we pick the wrong solution? Did we ideate around the wrong thing, right? Was the prototype messed up in some way? Or did we get some great confirmatory data? It's time to move on to the next question. But that's this process that we go through. Empathize, define a point of view, ideate, prototype, and then test. That's design thinking 101.
Yeah. Okay. So wait a minute. So there's questions that are guiding the questions, right? But what I really like about this is this helps me to traverse the different questions, right? So it helps me at each point, as I'm asking questions, answering those questions, I get unstuck so I can actually move to the next stage, right? Like a lot of times when I'm sitting here with my whiteboards, or I'm sitting here like all up in my head, or with my worksheets, or just talking with people, like I think that I'm actually unstuck. But really what I'm doing is I'm committing egregious errors that will rob me of my time, money, and other resources later. Because what I'm doing is I'm making assumptions way too early, right? And by nature of me making an early assumption and acting on that false or otherwise or unvalidated assumption, that's how I'm spending all my time, money, and other resources. And that's how I'm getting stuck, right? Because I don't know about y'all, or you even, Josh. It sucks getting stuck because I don't even know I'm stuck until when it's actually too late, when I'm already feeling like I'm stuck and I just don't want to be stuck. In fact, when I got stuck, like, I don't know, like maybe 2 weeks, a month, 2 months earlier, and I just didn't know it at the time, right? So I feel like what we're doing, like in the very beginning, we said, okay, well, this is like using a lantern to light the way, right? Well, the questions are the lantern, right? And breaking free of those like cycles of erroneous assumptions is actually moving through that process that actually gets us to asking the right questions that allows us to be unstuck eventually, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah. So this is fascinating. This is interesting because I mentioned right at the top that design thinking is such this broad, big, like hairy, thorny thing, right? It's a messy hairball of a concept, and it's really complicated. So it's difficult to talk about. And so I think we could probably like say we're done talking about it in the abstract, right? Right. So like the next logical
Ooh.
question is, where does this fit in a startup? Because after all, this is startup shop talk. So despite the fact that design thinking can be used in so many different contexts, including like user interface design, the design of a bridge, right? We can use it in a lot of different ways, but how do we use it inside of a startup, right? So I'm curious for you guys out there, like, where do you think design thinking fits in this startup process? How do you use it in that? Drop that down in the comments. Let me know how you're using design thinking right now to do your startup. And in the meantime, Dan, let's go through like some startup stages, and then maybe talk a little bit about how design thinking works on those individual stages.
Okay.
Get
Yeah.
us started.
Well, I mean, I feel like the easiest way to just start approaching design thinking is like, hey, I'm making a thing. How do I incorporate design thinking into making my thing? So an app, hardware, service, that kind of thing, for example.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So let's say you're just starting out, right? And you're like, oh man, Josh, I got this great idea, right? I think that there's people out there and they're all experiencing this problem, and I'm going to create an app that's going to like crush this problem and crush it in the marketplace, and I'm going to be a billionaire
Yeah.
before the year's out. How does design thinking tell me what to do next?
Yeah. Well, the first step is, talk to customers and see if you
Right.
actually have a problem that's worth solving, right? That's
Interesting.
what, and that's sort of like that's sort of becoming mainstream. I don't necessarily think it was always like something that was prevalent on everybody's minds when we were talking about creating an app, right? It was like, hey, I got a cool idea. Let me just draw it out and show it to people, and it's going to be awesome, right? But now the conversation's changed a little bit. I don't know. I feel like in the last like 5, 8, 10 years, depending on where you're at geographically in the United States or how close to startup land you might find yourself, is now it's more, well, are you sure that you have a problem? And I think that is because we've seen such an influx of an inundation of the marketplace of all these things that do all these things, right? And so now it's becoming a like a relevant process, right? Because there's just so much competition and there's so much out there, that we need to start saying, okay, well, all right, great. So the broad problems are solved. Now let's get a little more nuanced with that. How do we know what to solve? How do we know something is actually an issue? Oh, I can't hear you, Josh. Josh is muted.
I was muted.
No, you're not.
Yes. Well, we've all been there. So, okay. So I want to pivot a little bit. Let's take this concept that you're talking about and apply it to Laura's question. So
Okay.
our friend Laura Good from Startup Sack here,
What up,
and
Laura?
Dick are having a chat
Thanks for
in the
joining.
comments about how to use design thinking to create a strategy for a nonprofit focused on economic development through supporting entrepreneurship. A lot to unpack there, right? But what does it mean? Like, how do you go about this process of like figuring out what the customer wants, right?
Hmm.
In the
You know
context of
what?
something even like nonprofit.
All right, so this is super tricky. At least it's not as linear as one might think with a statement like this, right? And this is why I think so. Because we have multiple users, multiple stakeholders here, right? The way I like to think about, and it's just basically where I find myself, and this is just Dan's point of view. This might not be truth, or it's only maybe a facet of truth. Is that when I'm thinking about nonprofit stuff, I think about, okay, there's the people that I'm serving, the user, right? And then there are the people who want to serve the users that aren't necessarily doing that. So basically, users and stakeholders. And so, yeah, like, who is the actual customer? Well, how are we defining the customer here? Are they the people that are the ones giving us money, or are the customers the actual users or the beneficiaries of the mission of the nonprofit, right? Like, it's complicated. And I would actually venture to say that maybe this is like starting to, you know, trend towards the wicked category. What do you think?
I couldn't agree more.
Yo, it's
Um,
wicked.
it's wicked and not in the good way, right? Not in the bad way either, actually. It's
Like
just wicked in a
alfalfa?
way that
Like, is it wicked in an alfalfa sense?
it's wicked in the sense that we need to use different tools in our toolbox, right?
Like, we need to pour
To
some
figure this
water
thing out,
on it
right?
so it like just
And so
melts
this is
away.
like this is the broad question, because like what Laura's getting at here, what you were getting at there too, is like figuring out who the customer is, like is the first step in that design thinking process, right? So if we
Mhm.
go back to our little diagram here of this 5 or 6 step process, right? We have the first step is like understanding our users, right? And that's probably understanding context, around that. And I don't want to oversimplify too much too, because as we all know, right, at startups, nonprofits, anything can have more than one user, right? Can have more than one customer. So I don't want to oversimplify too much there, but I do want to share a little something. So those first stages, this process of figuring out who the customer is, understanding, empathizing with them, right? We call that need finding, as in finding a need. Right?
Mhm.
That's the
Mhm.
design thinking term for this. And I love the word need finding, because need finding tells us, right, what exactly is that we're really ultimately doing. We're finding a need, not some vague want, not something that we think is interesting, but we're talking to customers to find out what their needs are. And so the very first step in any need finding process, to even go back to the startup example you were talking about before, Dan, is to find out what specifically we're trying to figure out what the landscape looks like, right?
Yeah.
So we go out there, we start talking to customers, and there's lots of different ways that we can do that. So we're going to talk to our sponsors, we can talk to entrepreneurs, we could talk to other economic development groups. Or if we're early stage startup, we could talk to who we think has this problem. We could talk to people related, like either by blood or by business relationship or whatever, to people who we think have this problem. And we could start asking questions, and this process of asking questions and need finding can be really powerful. And there's all kinds of questions to ask, right? You can ask the straightforward questions, but you can also ask these like emotive questions. We can
Mhm.
ask things
What do you
like
mean?
well, we can ask like to understand their behaviors, right? So let's
Uh-huh.
say you're talking to them and you say something, and their mouth kind of crooks up a little bit. You go, oh, that's interesting. Why do you smile when you say that, right?
Yeah.
Or why'd you have that reaction,
Yeah.
to what I just said, right? You could ask them things about what works for them or what doesn't work for them. You could ask questions about the order of things, right? How did you do it before, right? What happened afterward? We can ask about exceptions, right? So this sounds like this is something that works a lot for you. When didn't it work, right? Have you ever
Yeah.
had problems with blank before, right? You could talk about if you had to explain this to somebody who doesn't know anything about startups, what would you say, right? Or how would you explain this to a 5-year-old? Or you could ask them to do some vision casting and say, what do you think this is going to look like in 2045, right? Um, any of those kinds of things. When we start asking these questions they're really open-ended, right? Because it's qualitative research. We're trying to understand how everything connects together, how they're feeling, relationships between things. And we're trying to, again, find out what that need is, right?
Yeah. Okay. So I have I have an experience I'd like to share. Um, After I get this hair out of my mouth, which I just did. So, okay.
See,
Thank you.
but a problem in the startup space should be like that hair in your mouth, right?
Yo, I can't
It's stuck
ignore
there.
it.
Right? It never leaves your tongue. The problem is just it's the hair that's stuck on the tongue of the entrepreneur.
Right. Okay. All right. So check this. I had this idea, and I was like, actually, it was based off a problem that I had as a store owner. It was that, okay, when the fridge breaks, you only find out once you get into the store in the morning, and maybe the fridge broke, like, I don't know, maybe 6 hours ago or something like that. So basically, you've got an entire fridge full of produce, full of like product and all that kind of stuff that is now going to be wasted, right? You don't have anything to serve customers that are coming in. So this makes a big problem, right? Like especially in a restaurant. So no, that wasn't planned, by the way. Um, so anyways, here was the problem was I came in and the fridge broke. And I was like, man, that sucks. I wonder if it would be cool if I had a way to know if the fridge broke when it actually broke so I can go in and save inventory. And so what I did was I interviewed about 10 people because I was like, hey, wait a minute, let me think about this thing. Like, have other people experienced this problem before? And I didn't care who I was talking to, as long as they were in the restaurant industry. So I talked to executive chefs, I talked with cooks, I talked with a small business owner, and I talked with a server. And each of them had this different perspective of how a broken fridge was actually going to affect them. So the server basically said, "Oh yeah, this really sucked because I walked in chaos, my whole world was thrown off. It was hurry, it was more stress." For the executive chef, the problem was, "Oh, my this is gonna cost inventory. I'm not gonna be able to like get things out on time, and oh by the way, it's gonna cost money. So how am I gonna replace all this? How am I gonna like reappropriate everybody's time and talent in order to handle this actual problem, right?" And for the store owner, it was all about like, oh, I can't serve the customers and it's going to cost a lot of money. So each of these folks had different perspectives. And there was like each of it is just, each facet of the problem was actually a little bit more painful or less painful, depending on who you were in the actual equation, right? And so I just that when you were talking, Josh, that made me think of this particular example that like, okay, well, as entrepreneurs, we know what the general problem is, right? But how do we actually get at the biggest, baddest problem? It might be the same problem. It might be the same problem, but it depends on like who you're talking with and who that stakeholder is and all that kind of stuff. So was that specifically relevant to, the nonprofit question? I think maybe probably not. But um, I but I felt like it was relevant to the conversation anyways, because we're talking about like finding out what we didn't know, or finding out that it wasn't like something was actually more important than what we actually gave it credit for.
Right, right. It's about finding those unknown unknowns, right? I think is the
Yeah.
Rumsfeldian language that you were searching for there. But I love that example. It's a great example, and we can use that as like a springboard to get into like this specific nonprofit example. Because so
Yeah.
like Laura was talking about that, like there are all kinds of different audiences, right?
Uh-huh.
And Laura runs like some complex organizations and complex ecosystems, so it's like I have to oversimplify just to answer the question quickly, but like I think the idea here that what we're looking for is like if you have a bunch of different stakeholders and a bunch of different people that you're serving, right? It's easy to then think about customers in a reductive sense, like customers are the entrepreneurs we serve, or customers are the sponsors we serve. They're all customers, right? Everybody's a customer.
Seems
We
pretty
use the word
logical.
what?
It seems pretty logical.
Yeah, I mean, like, because everybody's a customer. We want to treat everybody as a customer because that's the only way that it actually works. And so, like, there's I like that, Laura, you put it in quotes, right? Selling them on the work we're doing can be hard. And that's because you're starting from a place that we would always tell a startup never to start, right? It's like you're not solving a problem for them, you're trying to sell them on doing something good. And that can work on occasion, but it can be really, really hard. So what instead, like I think the idea of need finding here is to talk and to various sponsors, various stakeholders, as well as entrepreneurs, ecosystem players, and figure out what their needs are. Do all that need finding work, and those needs can be broad. It could be like, oh, actually, we're a bank and we just don't get the startups right away, and those are accounts that we want, right? And so their need is exposures, advertising, those kinds of things. That's perfectly valid. But there also might be pipeline things for ecosystem players. There might be some audience and events that they're looking to co-creation as a brand development exercise, or anything else. If I had real examples, you would have already gotten them out of me. But the idea there is like is we can use that same process to uncover what their pain points are. And the way any two-sided or multi-sided market works, whether it's a nonprofit, or which is probably a harder version of this, or in a startup, is that you have to do that need finding all over the place, right? And then you have to have that perfect Venn diagram where that need finding overlaps. And when you get to that point of view, it's a point of view that includes both of them because
Okay.
it's solving a need for both sides.
Okay. So I'm sold on this, right? I'm like, totally makes sense. I need to find value proposition for this segment, value proposition for that segment, all that kind of stuff. But it seems like I'm going backwards, right? Like
Say
when I'm
more.
in. Well, okay, so I've got a thing. It's already up and running. Let's now assume that I'm a founder now, and I have a product and it's doing a thing and it's solving a need for a particular customer, but I need more, and I need more support from the ecosystem and that kind of stuff, right? For me to go back and be like, I mean, it feels like a step back. Like, oh man, I got to go and do all this research, like, and I got to like talk to these people, and I got to retool this whole thing. That's a lot of work, man. So why should I even do that? That's what like, because I mean, for myself, even I'm like, I've observed customers in the wild. I've seen them do like things, and I have a solution, but they won't look at the solution. Why? Well, Dan, you need to go back and interview those people. Well, I already interviewed them. Now what? Like, what do I do now? Why should I go back? It seems like I'm just rehashing old things. Or it seems like mostly I don't have time for this. They should
So
just,
why is that not true?
that's what I'm asking you.
Oh, you're at, okay. Well,
Why? Like, why should I be
it
doing this?
okay, that's a great question, but I'm gonna answer it in a dissatisfactory way. It is taking a step back. It absolutely is. All right.
Love it.
Because like there's no way
I'm going to
around
tell
that.
you, but you're not going to like it.
Well, yeah, I mean, but you're gonna like it by the end of the answer, but you're
I
not gonna
know.
like it at
I'm
the
just
start.
kidding.
Like the problem that we're encountering here is a psychological one more than a real one, right?
Hmm.
And it's a psychological barrier of progress. And so, by way of example, let me ask you a question, Dan. What's the difference between being lost and being stuck?
Let's see. Law. Well, do I know I'm lost?
Yeah, so like for me, the difference between being lost and being stuck, right? Lost means I don't know where I'm going, right? Is
Right.
it this way? Is it that way? Is it whatever? Like when you're at that point, that's when you can say, sure, like let's do some need find, let's do some customer discovery, let's find out what we're working on, right? On the flip side, stuck is I do know where I'm trying to go, right? I'm trying to
Uh,
solve this problem for these people, right? That's the direction. I want to go that way, right? So I know where I'm going, but I'm not making progress. I'm stuck, right?
yeah,
And so oftentimes when you're stuck, what you have to do is take a step back to get a running start,
that makes sense.
right? And
That makes
so that's oftentimes where design thinking comes into play. It should have been at the start. It should have been at the start of the journey, but sometimes you don't and you get stuck. Either sales start to lag or you're missing clarity and focus on who your customer is or any number of other things, right? But it's like we need to figure out what direction we really want to walk. And then once we have that, we need to figure out what the best way to get there is. So sometimes that involves taking a step back and figuring out what we're trying to do.
Okay,
The
so
other
I want to,
problem is,
can I
oh
say
yeah,
one
go.
thing?
Yes, please.
Here's what I want to mention is that, at least in my mind, sometimes I think about, oh, well, I should have known this. I should have been better at this. And the nature of the evolution of a startup or an idea or a concept or an ecosystem or anything like that, it is messy. And I feel like sometimes it's not appropriate to have to know the entire process in the very beginning, right? Like, kind of like when you're making a clay sculpture, right? What are you doing? It's a reductive process where you have this block of stuff, right? Of clay, obviously, and you're taking things away, and you're like, but you have to keep stepping back to see, hey, is this working or is this not working? And ideally, what you'd like is to be able to, like, from start to finish, just get in there, just do it, and just systematically reduce it all down until you get this like nice little sculpture, right? But I don't think it works that way. I think sometimes you have to be like, you know what, I don't like the head on this model, let me just chop the head off and let me put a blob of clay there to, like,
Right.
reattach the head, and then start working. Oh, wait a minute, wait, I need a bigger neck now because that thing. I feel like that's a totally natural process. I feel like a lot of times when we do get in this area of stuckness, we're I mean, I could just speak for myself. A lot of times I'm like, Dan, how could you do this? How could you do this to us? And by us, I mean me, right? Like, why are we here? Like, this sucks. I don't want to be here. But when I acknowledge that, and when I start to understand, wait a minute, okay, well, I guess the only way forward is by taking a step back. And the closer I get to kind of like being okay with that is how I actually start making progress again. So I don't like how this feels, I don't like how this whole I need to take a step back so I can move forward thing. I don't like how it feels because I'm like, wait a minute, I thought I was doing good. I thought I was moving, you know. But in fact, it turns out maybe I was moving. I was just moving along the circle, right? And I just couldn't understand that maybe I wasn't going anywhere. Not to say that that is where we're at in the case that we're talking about right now. I'm just talking about from my personal experience. Like,
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I don't want to be too reductive when we talk about design thinking because we can end up in a trap where we start thinking of design thinking as a process that has a life cycle like this
mm,
like it's an A to Z, it's this 5 step 6 step process that mirrors the startup life cycle, right? And so our startup looks at like first we do step 1, then we do step 2, then we do step 3, and in our startup journey mirrors the design thinking journey, and that's it. So like, therefore, if we're using design thinking at stage 3 of our startup, we're really going back to stage 1. It's not true, right? It's a bad way to think about it. And so let me give you some examples, right? So if we think about customer development, right? That's the 4 steps to the epiphany from Steve Blank. It's a core concept as part of the lean startup, right? You should be following this process, right? We're not going to talk about it in detail here today, but I strongly recommend, if you're not familiar with customer development, to either reading Steve Blank's book, The 4 Steps to the Epiphany, or Eric Ries's book, The Lean Startup, to get some more detail on that, or just Google it. Even Wikipedia is going to give you some good information. But anyway, customer development, right, has 4 basic steps. There's customer discovery, where we figure out who are the customers that we think are having this problem, right? We try to find out where they are and start talking to them and figuring it out. And then we thought, oh, okay, they have this need and we think we can maybe solve it in this particular way. And so then we do something to try to figure out if that solution's right. And then we move into customer validation, right? Where we start validating, is the problem solution fit? Not only are there people who have the problem, but are there people who have the problem and this is the right solution for them, right? And they'll pay money for this, right? And so we go through that process of validating that there's a there, right? That we're onto something. And then we move into customer creation, right? Where we start then actually bringing in customers and building out our customer factory and getting a thing that makes a lot of sense and start building that up. And then the last stage is company building, right? Customer discovery, customer validation, customer creation, then company building, right? It's that basic process that we have. And in that journey, that sounds like an awful lot like the design thinking process that we started from. And they do share some things in common. But the really important thing to understand is that design thinking as a big macro process does look like the startup journey in some respects. But as a micro process, you're using those 6 steps at every single part of your journey. Here's some examples. So really early on, we've been talking about this idea of basic need finding. Like, is there a customer out there that we think has this problem, right? Absolutely. For sure, right? When you're doing customer discovery, it's exactly how you want to start thinking about design thinking, right? But then once you get into it, let's jump like 3 years into the future, and you have a product that's out in the marketplace. You got paying customers. Maybe you don't have an IPO yet, right? You're still working on it. You don't have product market fit yet. Maybe you're close, right? But you're kind of working in that process. And so you might be thinking about, how do I get my customers onboarded faster, better, cheaper? How do I get customers who activate to engage more and do all of that kind of thing, right? As we start doing that, right, then we start going, okay, well, that's a design question. We go through the design thinking process even at that stage. It's just that the need finding isn't the need of our product it's solving. It's the need of the onboarding, right? We want them to activate, and that in order for that, which means we want them to get value out of it. And if we want them to get value out of it right when they go into the process, we need to figure out what that hole is there. What are customers needing that they're not getting when they first sign up that's leading to a bounce, right? Or whatever the particular problem is, right? So we're using design thinking even at that step. So no matter where you are in your startup journey, design thinking is a way to answer those thorny questions that don't answer themselves. And we do that regardless of where we are in the journey. It's always about this same type of process. What do you think about that, Dan? Does that make you feel better?
It does. So okay, because I guess what I'm hearing from you is, you need to practice this. This has to be a part of your DNA. This has to be a part of like what you do all the time. This has to be a working part of your mind, right? Like Dick says in the comments, you have to stay agile, right? Like, and Sil said that discovery is so important. It is, absolutely. So I feel like, okay, so we're talking about design thinking right now. Great. Does that mean we could like take it and put it on the shelf and be like, cool, we checked that box, we thought about that, and that's awesome. Now let's go back to building our startup. And well, it's tempting to do that. And I feel like for me anyways, is naturally I just go back to saying, okay, that's on the shelf. Now let me go think about like, servers and code and, transactions and all that other kind of stuff. But I feel like what I need to do is make sure that I'm practicing design thinking as much as I can so that it becomes part of what I do, how I do it, when I do it. Because what you're telling me, or at least what I'm hearing, is that design thinking belongs in pretty much every step of the way, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
So my next question is awesome, but
It's a
how?
Dan question.
You know, Josh ain't owning that. Um, that's fine. I can own it. My question is, all right. So I'm sold. The design thinking is great. I want to do it. I want to do it as often as I can. But how do I practice this? How do I make this part of my DNA? How do I am I like writing a post-it note and sticking in front of me and sort of remember to think design? Or am I
Right.
thinking about, well, like you said, when I have a question that doesn't answer itself. How about this? What if every time I'm uncertain about something, I could say, does design thinking fit here or not? What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think that's totally right because right the idea that you're trying to get at here, I think, is how do I make it reflexive, right? Oh,
Yeah.
that's design thinking. I got this, right? This is the process I need to follow. Um,
And oh,
that's
by the way, how do I make that not disruptive to normal operations? Like, how do I
right.
integrate design thinking into normal operations so that it's not this chore extra thing that I have to do? It's like just something that I happen to be doing.
Right. So I'm not sure that the disruption is totally avoidable because I think sometimes it's right, but I'm going to try to answer it as if that's not
Yeah.
true. All right.
Yeah.
I just want to throw that footnote in here
Right
for the
on.
design thinking experts that are also watching this. Um, so I love this comment from Laura too about like being like a meditation practice, right?
Yeah.
Because that's exactly what it's like. It's like you want to get into a space, right? We want to create a space for us to do that. In order to do that, we have to think about, right? Just like mindfulness, how do I stay in the present moment? How do I think about design thinking? And I think that's totally right. And so to answer your question, I think there's a couple different ways to go about it. One is by default, we suck at design thinking. Humanity, we suck at it. We're not good at it. And the reason we're not good at it is because design thinking is actually counter evolutionary, right?
Yeah.
Design thinking does not help us avoid the tiger. It just
That's right.
doesn't.
Yep.
Right. So we have to, first of all, acknowledge that developing this like a practice, like meditation, is going to mean we have to start recognizing the situations where we want to apply it. And so the way we want to do that is exactly what you were saying, Dan, about we need to find those points where we go, oh, you know what? That's a wicked problem. That's a wicked question. Right. We can't just answer that in the normal way. We're not going to have a team meeting that's going to end with an answer to this question. Right. It's not going to be a thing. And so we have to figure out another way to do that. Right. So then once you recognize, then you go, okay, what does it look like to incorporate this thing? And always, no matter what, it's going to be figuring out like what is the need that we're trying to solve, right? And that might be something that you can answer in a micro little iteration that you can do in a team meeting, right? We have enough data about our customers that we can get to a reasonable point of view from which to start. But it might have to do, it might mean that we have to go back out and do some research. I don't know. That's the disruptive kind where I would argue that it's right to
Right.
be
Yeah.
disruptive because, as Steve Blank said, there are no facts inside the building. So get out of the building, right? Sometimes you got to do that. And that's where, like Sil was saying in the comments, I threw this up earlier, but like the discovery is so important, right? So sometimes you have to do that. Sometimes you have to step back and say, are we even talking about the right thing here? Do we know what the hell we're talking about right now? Like we absolutely have to do that and understand that from the depths of the emotional experience of our customers, right? It's part of that. So once you start going through that process, then you have to just start bringing in design thinking tools, right? And there's a couple of them that I just want to highlight super quick, right? So one of the design thinking tools is, it's actually more of a concept than a tool, but it's the idea of divergent versus convergent thinking. The idea is that no matter where you are in design thinking, you're always going through that cycle of first doing some type of divergent thinking. You can think of that as roughly speaking, as like ideation. It's quantity over quality, right? The idea is whether we're trying to come up with the right question or we're trying to come up with the right solution or we're ideating on or whatever, what we're doing is trying to come up with a great big population of potentials. We're suppressing our internal critic. That's where the tools come in, right? We suppress our internal critic to get all of this stuff out, right? And now we have this big array, this big mess on the table, right? If you've done a design sprint before, which is what we do at the Right Box, if you've done those before, like this is emblematic of the sticky notes, right? We have sticky notes all over the walls, right? So we got these ideas everywhere. And then we go through a process of convergent thinking, where we take all those ideas and really just bubble up to the surface, the one that we want to focus on, right? And so no matter where you are in the process, it's always divergent and convergent thinking at all the stages of design thinking, and macro from a startup perspective too, right? It's that divergent, convergent thinking. And in order to accomplish that, you can do different things like exercise constraints, right? Constraints are super, super valuable, right? If you're interested in more about constraints, there was a recent episode of the Inside the Box podcast that I host, and we talked about the value of constraints when it comes to this idea of creativity and thinking outside the box. So you can kind of check that out. But there are different kinds of constraints that we use in design thinking. We can do input constraints where we limit our resources, right? Like how much money we're going to spend, for example. We can do time as a process constraint, right? So we can limit how much time we're choosing to spend on something. Like, like Laura's talking about, we took, brainstorming in the 80s, you put a little structure around that, right? And you say, like, we're going to spend the next 15 minutes just coming up with as many ideas as possible. That's brainstorming, right? Then we use another tool to filter those many ideas down into one thing. But we started out with this constraint on brainstorming, right? Where we're saying that we're going to spend 15 minutes on it, and our ideas are going to be sketches on paper, right? You're not going to be busting out Figma. You're not going to be busting out Sketch or Photoshop, right? That's not what it's about, right? Our constraint is a pencil. No, a pen. You can't even erase. It's a freaking pen and a white sheet of paper, right? And like so we have that kind of constraint. And by putting those constraints on there, we're suppressing our internal critic and getting all these ideas out, So there's all kinds of different tools that you can, that's just scratching the surface, because there's so many different kinds of tools and so many different kinds of constraints you can bring in. But the very first thing is recognizing this is a design thinking problem, and I need to bust out my design thinking process.
Okay. All right. So you know what I do now is, so I've been, I don't know, it's probably about 2015. I got super fascinated by the amount of stuff that you could, like cool stuff that you could actually get from the design thinking process. I was like, man, I really, really need to practice this. And, going back to the thing that you said, Josh, was design thinking is hard. And it's hard to practice. And we don't do it intuitively because we're not good at it. And I just want to highlight that. I'm not good at it. I don't think I'm okay if I never become a master at design thinking, right? But here's what I can say is that the more I do it, the more I grok it. And the more I grok it, the more I'm comfortable with the process, and the more I start to begin to understand how I can rely on this process to actually come up with some great shit that like people love. Like, okay, so in the very beginning, for me, design thinking looked like going to a lecture by, shout out to Mark Randall, and he was talking about, basically, Adobe Kickbox and how that whole thing worked, and it was basically like a design thinking exercise, right? But internal entrepreneurship, that kind of thing. But that so inspired me. I was like, well, this is really great. And the thing that I really, really, really loved about the Kickbox was the testing portion. It was, wait, how do you create these tests so that you can like basically not intervene in the result and see the actual result of somebody interacting with a product or a potential product, or something that the product just even looked like, right? That was fascinating for me. And I was like, man, I need to know how to do this, because it was so cool. It was so telling. It was take yourself out of the equation, watch behavior, and get your results from that. And so I kind of understood then intuitively that design thinking was great in that it helped me to kind of see around corners and get those unknowns captured. But I'm not good at it. I'm okay saying that. I'm not good at it. I don't ever want to be good at it, because that means at some point that I'm just kind of closed off and I've learned everything that I need to learn. But that is the key thing about it, right? Is remaining teachable, remaining in this mindset.
I love that.
I don't know what I don't know. And I'm okay with that because I'm a person, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. So, we're getting close to the end of our hour here together. One of our principles of Startup Shop Talk is we start on time and we end on time. So we're going to do some like closing remarks, round out kind of stuff. But before we do, I do have one final question that I'd love to hear some comments on. Is now that we've been talking about design thinking for a while, and you maybe noodled it before, and a lot of you might be really familiar with design thinking. It definitely sounds like some of you are, judging by the comments. And so, how can you be more deliberate about using design thinking in whatever you're doing? Like, what is something like today that you can do to incorporate design thinking? I'd love to get some of that going on, inside here. That would be absolutely fantastic. While you guys are furiously pounding away at the keys to get some of that going in the chat, or just noodling on it, a couple of quick things here. So I would really love if you guys could, smash that like button and let people know that this is kind of awesome. Tell your friends. Feel free to share it on social. That would be totally awesome.
I mean, we're even doing this during the holidays, right? I mean, how could you not like a live stream on the 30th of December?
I know. It's kooky talk, but here we are all together, nerds, nerding out on our nerddom. And you guys might know, so today we did it at an abnormal time because of the holidays. We did it Thursdays. Ordinarily, our show is every single Friday at 11 a.m. Right here on YouTube. And so we're going to be back next Friday. That's January 7th at 11 a.m. So I hope you guys will join us then. Topic to be announced in about an hour, actually. So we'll have our topic announced there, so you can kind of get your questions ready and going on from that. And we'd really love, to hear your thoughts and your feedback. So if you have any ideas or suggestions, advice, whatever it is you want to give, you can always reach out to us at shoptalk@rightbox.co. Even if we don't respond, we do read every single message that we get. So that would be totally dope for you to do. So we did get some information coming in on the question here. So Laura's talks about scheduling uninterrupted time to do a design thinking session. Yes, that's hugely critical. It's one of those things, right? We got to create the space. I love that. That's so perfect.
Can I add to that real quick?
Please do.
Okay, so what I do for a living is I basically do that, right? I help and I hold space for people to do that. But here's the thing, when I go to work on my own stuff, I'm not necessarily the person that says, "Oh, I need help with this."
Mm-hmm.
So I guess to borrow a term from one of my colleagues and friends, sometimes coaches need coaches. And so I just want to call myself out there and say, hey, man, sometimes Dan needs to do a design thinking session for himself, but I also need help with it, because it's really, really hard to find to put, I've done this before. I've role played, right? Where I'm like, Dan, okay, think about yourself as your client right now. Damn, that's like, it's doable, but it's hard. It's hard. It doesn't come natural. And it's just, and talking with JDM from time to time, like he'll like jiggle it loose. And I'm like, oh, okay, that was the question that I was missing. Right. And even talking with everybody else, like telling them about my problem or something like that. Even if I don't have a dedicated coach, it's always great to provide a little bit of context, ask the person the question, and then see what their result, see what they come back with. So I just I wanted to own that for myself. Like sometimes I'm reluctant to ask somebody to help. But I do want to say that it's so valuable.
Right. I love that. All right. So I think that's probably a good place to round it out. So we have last two quick things here today. So Dan, you mentioned inside your addition to Laura's comments here about what you do every day. So how do people know if they should reach out and talk to Dan outside of Shop Talk?
Well, I don't know. Like, that's a good question.
It's a great sales pitch. I love that sales pitch.
So I do have a site. It's called the leaninnovator.org. What the Lean Innovator does is it helps folks move through this design thinking process, basically getting from 0 to 1, 0 customers to 1 customer at least, right? What we do at the Lean Innovator is we help somebody go from the very beginning, understanding the customer, doing interviews, market niche research, and getting all the way to a place where we can present a value proposition in one sentence. And then, of course, we can expand that once we have that one sentence. But it's an evidence-based sentence, right? So evidence-based value proposition using the design thinking process to inform all of that. So we're currently the Lean Innovator scheduled to do 2 cohorts. It's a cohort-based course that will start in May. So you got some time, and also in the fall time. So that's what we've got slated up for 2021 so far. Thanks for asking.
All right. Awesome. And so I'll just round things out here. So I mentioned that I'm the founder of the Right Box. And so we facilitate the process of innovative decision making with teams, from helping startups find the fastest path to their first 1,000 customers, or working with Fortune 100s to innovate on their business models to launch whatever the next big thing is for them and their niche. If you like Startup Shop Talk, check out rightbox.co. We've got a growing library of free content, including a new podcast that I mentioned earlier called Inside the Box. It's all about how to think like an innovator. We got articles and videos and stuff. So check that stuff out and let us know what you think. Again, you can always reach out to us as comments and suggestions. And we really hope we will see you for our next live show, January 7th, 11 a.m. right here on YouTube. Dan, thank you so much for hanging
Thank
out
you,
with me
Josh.
today. Really
And
enjoyed
good
it. Had a lot of fun.
Yeah, I did too. And thanks for showing Dick. Thanks for showing Laura and Sil. Nice to have you as well.
All right. Awesome. So we will end it there today. Happy New Year, everyone, and see you next week.
Bye-bye.